guys, it's Katie, and I'm here today to do a review of Assassin's Fate by Hobb. So, I'm doing a review of this giant tome that is Assassin's Fate. This is the third and final book in the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, and it is the 16th book in the Realm of the Elderling series, which also means it's the last book. First of all, I honestly cannot believe I am done with this entire series. I spent 3 years of my life dedicated to reading this entire world. Like, it was a process. And depending on when this goes up, you guys might know kind of my journey and my story, but basically my anniversary is coming up / past, depending, as I said, when this goes up. But it was September 10th, and so that was the full 3 years. So reading this series literally almost took me exactly 3 years, and that is just crazy to me. I'm gonna take another brief aside and just talk to you about this cover. Like, this is literally probably my favorite cover that I own that isn't a special edition. I love the gold and turquoise color and just kind of how it melds together, which is maybe symbolic. I have to think about it still, but it's just completely gorgeous. And looking at the artwork, it's just even more spectacular now that I'm finished than before I started it. I think I'll do this review like I did my review for Fool's Quest, where I talk about the plot, the characters, the world building, and the writing. In order to talk about this book in any semblance of orderly fashion, I have to have some kind of order. Otherwise, it'll just be me screaming and crying and spoiling like all 500 things that happen in here at once. So I'm not going to do that. The first thing I'm going to talk to you about is the writing. The writing is, like all of the other books, spectacular. It draws you in completely. It's so beautifully and intricately written, and it just doesn't feel like you're reading it. It feels like you're living it. And so, of course, I loved every aspect of the writing. I thought she did a phenomenal job, and I just can't help but adore every word that comes off the page. Now, one thing I will say about this book, and I guess it sort of ties into the writing, but it might also tie in a little bit to the plot, but the pacing of this book was not perfect. It started off pretty well because it literally picked up right where we left off after the end of Fool's Quest. But then after that, it was very much a journey kind of thing before we hit the major climax and ultimately the resolution. But it just felt a bit slow at times, especially the other characters' POV that we got. Remember how I said now that we have multiple POVs, not just Fitz? Well, the other characters' POV was a bit slow. Fitz's was fine, but the other character, just because of everything that was happening with that storyline, it was just very difficult to read, very frustrating, and very gut-wrenching. So I preferred being with Fitz, despite all of the sad things that were happening with him too. It's just, yeah. So I thought that the pacing could have been a little bit better, but at the same time, the journeying part was still rich and full of so many significant, important moments that it didn't feel awful. But I did have a rough time the first half. So, talking a little bit about the plot, I can't go into too much depth on this because it is the final book of a trilogy and the final book of a 16-book series. So anything that I would say to you would be a spoiler. So I'm going to try and be as vague as possible. When we last saw Fitz and the Fool, they were on a quest of sorts of kind of revenge. And that very much continues in this story. One thing I will say about the plot is there are heavy themes of destruction and change. And through those destruction and change comes good things, but also a lot of bad things. And that's super vague, but ultimately it was a very interesting conclusion to this very, very long series. The reason I say interesting is because a ton happens. Like, this isn't, 850 something page novel. And just, while the first half might have felt a bit slow, there was a lot of character analysis and depth and relationshipy things. And then we had a lot of the action later. And ultimately we had this emotional, gutting ending. And it was just a lot all in one. Like, I literally talked to my friend on Skype solely about this book in depth for over 6 hours. That's how much there was to unpack in just this novel alone. So ultimately, I really liked the plot and how it was fleshed out and how it was written overall. Third, we're going to talk about the world building. And friends, let me just say, just Robin Hobb's world building is some of the most phenomenal I've read. She is just of such a high caliber when it comes to her world building that it astonishes me every single day. I feel like I know her world so well, but then there are facets, of course, that we don't know much about that I'd still like to know about. But just so much gets resolved and explored and explained in this book. We saw a place that we've been hearing about now for quite some time. And that was really, really quite cool for me. Like, I have it pictured in my head perfectly. And just how she wrapped up large chunks of her world into this intricate plot and interwove it into the characters' lives. It was just phenomenal. I can definitively say Robin Hobb has ruined me for fantasy. It'll be very hard to find someone else that rivals her, I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking too quickly, but that's how I feel. Now, on to the characters, because I can't not talk about my babies. Like, they're everything to me at this point. So, once again, our main characters are Fitz and the Fool, and then our third character, who we also get the POV from. But I'm not going to talk about them in detail much, because that POV is something you need to experience. You just need to know that character from the beginning of this trilogy. And if I were to say anything about that character, it would just be spoiling a lot. And I'm not going to do that. Despite other reviews talking about this character, like saying their name and talking about them at length, I am going to allude to things instead. We follow Fitz and the Fool, and of course, we get to see more and more of their relationship discussed and explored, and just a lot. There was a lot about their relationship. I mean, in a lot of ways, these books are focused on their relationship. They are the main characters of this series. And despite me shipping them, they are at the center. And if any of you watch Bones, I'm going to make a reference. They're the center, and the center must hold. Without the center, everything falls apart around them. There were some very poignant scenes, as always, with them, where they're traveling together and they have these deep discussions and these emotional talks and just share very, very personal things. And it was just very... The best word I can come up with for just this book in general was raw. Just the emotion in this book and the emotion that I, as the reader, felt was incredibly raw. And it just constantly kept being chafed away. This book is not one to just be read lightly, but also just, and I think this goes without saying, but don't read this until you've read all of the other ones. I know some people that have done that and then they give it a bad review because they're confused. It's yes, because you need to read all of the other books before you read this one. But as I said, we follow them, and then we have our, fun cast of side characters. There's just a whole slew of important side characters that are just so well written and detailed. A lot of side characters that you read in a lot of different novels, they're just kind of, along for the ride, and you don't really get to know much about them. Hobb and Hobb's characters, every single one of them is important and has a purpose. You may only see them for a short period of time, but they are significant in so many ways. Now I'm going to talk about the other POV character that I keep alluding to but refuse to name. And that character has quite a time of it. They are traveling because they've been kidnapped, and then they're constantly being beaten down, and I hesitate to use the word torture, but there was a lot of abusive stuff going on in that portion of the book for quite a while because of the people that we were dealing with. The bad guys in this trilogy were just the worst, okay? Just the worst. And the fact that this other character had to deal with them because of their grudges, just a lot of overlap, a lot of coming together, the culmination of every facet of Hobb's world kind of just comes to a head in this one singular volume, and that was just crazy. But once they get to the destination that they're traveling to, that character finally starts to come into their own in a very just 360 way. It's like light switch and whoa. If you guys follow me on Twitter, you might know what I'm referring to. Remember when I was talking about screaming instead of crying? Yeah, that had to do with this other character and some things that they were getting up to. And just, I'm still not over that. But I'm feeling a little bit better about it now that I talked to my friend. But also still, we have different feelings about it. So I mean, it was definitely an interesting conversation. But anyway, then all of the characters once again meet up at this other place. Lots of crazy stuff goes down. Lots of crazy stuff happens. And then the heartbreak starts to settle in, and the relationships once again get tested, and some get explored in different ways that we hadn't seen before. Characters that we've known for a long time now met some newer characters, and that was a really interesting interaction. Sometimes some very, very frustrating interactions. It was just, once the emotional stuff started to settle in, that was kind of it for me because I knew what was going to happen. I mean, granted, it's been foreshadowed from very, very early on in the series that this was kind of what was going to happen, but it didn't make it any less painful. And now we're going to talk about the final category, and that is the conclusion. Because the reason I'm talking about the conclusion here is because this is the conclusion not only of just the book, but of the series and of some characters' stories. In many ways. I'm not going to say how their stories ended because, major spoilers and you need to experience it. But, yeah, I was an emotional wreck. I mean, pretty much this whole book. I cried my way through this whole book, but particularly the end. I had just the last several chapters, once you start to realize what's happening, were just some of the most soul-crushing I think I've read ever. Because we've been with some of these characters from book one. And to see it all kind of come to a conclusion, and one that is basically perfect for the characters, even if it's not necessarily also the one that you want for them. It's perfect. But it's gut-wrenching and soul-destroying, and I will continue to say that for emphasis. I was completely and utterly destroyed and gutted after this, after I finished. It's been a couple of weeks at this point. I know that this book has been polarizing for a lot of people. Some people thought it was the greatest end and loved the end. Other people were severely, severely disappointed. And I'm just going to tell you flat out, I thought that this was the perfect ending for this series for several 500,000 reasons. Books are incredibly powerful and incredibly phenomenal. They've literally changed my life in many, many ways. But just seeing the conclusion happen the way it did, I thought it was pretty perfect. Were there flaws? Absolutely. What book doesn't have flaws? Every reader's going to find flaws with pretty much every book that they read. Even if it's their favorite book in the world, there's always going to be a flaw. But honestly, I just through discussing this with my friend and everything, I don't want there to be more trilogies. I think that if she were to continue writing in this world, that novellas and short stories would suffice with wrapping everything up or talking about characters and expanding on things. I think that would be perfect, or some kind of anthology even. But continuing on with the trilogy, I don't see what could happen. Because the way that it was written, the way that it was wrapped up, I just don't see how there is drastic room for more. But at the same time, it's complicated. But just to kind of wrap everything up, because this is supposed to be a review and not like a in-depth discussion about this series. This book was incredible. It wasn't by no means my favorite. It was by no means perfect. But the ending that she gave this series was perfect for the characters and I mean, while it wasn't necessarily what a lot of us may have wanted to happen, we all knew it was going to go that way. Like, it was always foreshadowed that it would end that way. And while I'm completely destroyed and gutted, I couldn't see it happening any other way. And I'm forever grateful that I found this series, slash, my friend told me about it. I feel like I should stop this here, otherwise, I'll just continue talking to you about it for 10 billion years. But I thoroughly enjoyed this. But as I said, it was by no means perfect. And I'm just gonna stop. But anyway, if you have read this book and want to talk to me about it, please feel free to DM me so we can scream about spoilers, because I'd rather not talk about them in the comments, because there are definitely people who watch my channel that are going to read them or have not finished the series, and I'd rather them not be spoiled. So if you have read it and want to come talk to me about spoilery things, definitely DM me on Twitter. Anyway, that's about all I've got for you today. So as always, feel free to like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media. I have a Twitter and a Goodreads, which are both linked below. And of course, I have other social media sites such as my travel Instagram, Tumblr, and Twitter if you'd like upon request. And I will come back with another video for you guys again soon. Okay, bye.